Today on Everyday Injustice, we have a number of people here on the case of real tragedy out of Antioch. A young man was killed in a way that was very similar to George Floyd. Angelo Quinto, his family had called out the police. The police arrived at the scene. They end up holding him down on the ground with his legs prone for a period of 6 to 8 minutes. And naturally, he ended up passing away during that time. And this past week in Contra Costa County, the Contra Costa County Coroner came up holding an inquest, and they determined that the cause of death was excited delirium, which for people like me who've been covering police issues for a long time is a gigantic red flag, because everyone from the AMA to various professional medical folks do not believe that that is a real diagnosis. So here to talk about this issue are the family of Angelo Quinto, Cassandra, and Bella. We also have attorney Ben Nussbaum. We may have John Burris come, although he's on vacation, but we're trying to get him on. And we also have investigator Robert Collins. So welcome everyone. And I guess we can talk real briefly with the family here who was actually at the scene when this horrible thing happened. So maybe you guys can kind of describe briefly what happened.
Sure, and just a little bit of a clarification. Robert Collins is my dad.
Oh, so, I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah. So what happened on that night was at around or after 11 p.m., my brother was experiencing extreme paranoia. And this was what we called an episode, where he just was completely acting out of character and very afraid, paranoid, seemed to be having hallucinations, and we were not patient with him on this night. And that really exacerbated his fears and led him to want to hold on to us and keep us all together so that, none of us would die or nothing would happen to us. That was a great fear of his, but that really then made us anxious. And I later called the police. And when they arrived, my mom had him in a bear hug on the floor in her bedroom, and he had calmed down a lot because a hug, it was exactly what my brother needed. Just the comfort from my mom that everything was going to be okay,
and I'm right there not leaving him,
and that that my mom was not leaving him. And I had made the 911 call while I was in a different room, but that's not really relevant right now. And when the police arrived, they expressed their confusion about who the call was for because it looked like my mom was in control. And so they asked about, who was restraining who. And then afterward, they took him from my mom's arms, put him on the ground with an officer handcuffing him, or they put him on his stomach. He shouted, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." And they handcuffed him and kneeled on his neck to upper back area of his neck, and held his legs crossed against his back or his butt. They pushed them against his back. And this all happened in front of my mom, specifically while I was just walking back and forth in the hallway to living room area. And she was just there first, and And this,
I did not leave the room. I was there the
Yeah.
whole time.
yeah,
Um,
and she had asked when he had, you know, become unresponsive at the beginning of the time we think that he probably became unresponsive, if he was asleep, and the officers did not acknowledge it really, or make any attempt to check on him. And also at one point an officer got tired and switched places, so a different officer was kneeling on his neck, and
Same
then
position,
in the same
even
position.
after I said, is he asleep? You know,
And so my mom asked that question a couple times, and you could hear that for the last 4.5 minutes at least. My brother was completely unresponsive. Oh, and I also had heard something at the beginning of that, I guess. I heard something like, "This is what we do to calm them down." Um, and then anyway, back to him being unresponsive. Again, my mom, asked if he was asleep, and there was really not much conversation going on between the officers and my brother. Or actually, no conversation between the officers and my brother. It was only between each other, laughing together or talking to my mom. And the only questions they asked to him had no substance. It was, "Are you going to be good now, Angelo?" or something like that. And it was really not an attempt to check on his well-being at all, especially after holding him in this restraint for so many minutes. And so when they finally turned him over, there was blood, a puddle of blood that was coming from his mouth or his face.
his mouth.
His eyes had rolled up in his head, and my mom says that he looked dead.
He did actually. He looked dead. You know,
Who rolled him over? The police or the paramedics?
the police. The police.
Yeah, the police rolled
Because
him over.
the reason why they rolled him over is because the paramedics were here, so they were, they rolled him over so they could, I don't know.
Yeah, and they like pressed on him, but nothing. Obviously, he was completely just
What was
gone.
the demeanor of the police like? Were they angry, or did they seem like they were in control?
The what made us so confused about the entire situation was just that they didn't seem like they were very malicious or anything. They seemed like, well, or we perceived them at least, as though they had control of
Yeah.
what they were doing and the situation. They were just doing what they were trained to do, as they said.
I trusted them. I thought they knew what they were doing, so I was just watching.
Well, that's why
So,
also mom only asked if he was asleep, just to get their attention on him.
yeah,
But yeah, it wasn't,
it was very calm.
there was no beating,
no,
obviously.
even when they took Angelo and put him on his stomach and handcuffed him and pulled his leg up against his body, Angelo was not even doing anything. I he was very compliant. uh it's just, I didn't understand. I didn't understand why they had to use that kind of restraint or force.
They didn't have to.
Yeah, because it, it he was not, he was very compliant.
And
it
he
was
was
such
not
a
a violent
he was not
person.
violent. No weapons, no nothing. It's like it's
And they had also responded to his cries of, "Please don't kill me," with, "We're not going to kill you," or something like
exactly. Yeah.
that. So yes, we were I guess we had these ideas about police brutality that just sort of aligned with malicious facial expressions and taking out your guns and always or going for your weapons and all of that. But I didn't realize that your body could be such a powerful weapon even when you seemed calm. I'm talking about when the officers seemed calm. So, because like I said, while they were restraining him, they were laughing together too. It was all very lighthearted. They were saying to my mom, "Oh, mom's strong," because my mom is 4'11". My brother's not a big guy. My brother was as big as me, an inch taller, and they were just having, I don't know. It was just, that's why it was so difficult for us to understand the depth of the situation. I know that even when they took him out on the gurney doing CPR, I texted my dad, "He looks blue," or "looks blue." But even then, I just couldn't really conceive that anything could be wrong. It was all very confusing.
Mhm. It was so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was. I mean, the whole
Well,
night.
let's bring Ben into this discussion. I mean, as an attorney, what are you seeing here?
Man, I mean, I've done a lot of cases that involve asphyxiation during restraint, and this fits the pattern almost to a T. Everything about it kind of screams out asphyxiation. And when you hear, people hear the term police brutality and they assume that, that must mean a beating took place. What we're talking about is unreasonable force, and the case laws has been clearly established since 2003 that restraining a person in a way that asphyxiates them is unreasonable force, unless there's a reason, unless you can use lethal force. But in a case where you have someone restrained in that way, it's hard to conceive of how you could be allowed to use lethal force. So what's happened is the defense side, seemingly, apparently, I say funded by Taser, although their experts deny that, but it seems to be that Taser is kind of behind this, is a real push beginning in the very late 90s to establish something that they call excited delirium. And now I deposed the coroner down in Florida, Dade County, Miami-Dade County Coroner Charles Wetley, years ago on a case, who is the rediscoverer of excited delirium. It was lost to the sands of time, apparently, until the late 90s. And he claims to have rediscovered it. It used to be called something called Bell's mania. In any event, but when it was rediscovered as a different species. And apparently, the only documented forms of excited delirium that cause fatality are those that occur when police are restraining a person. And I asked him about that and in deposition, and he says to me, well, there are definitely people who die from excited delirium when the police aren't restraining them. But usually that's, they'll like jump off a building or jump off a bridge. And I'm like, well, isn't the jump what kills you, not the delirium? And of course, that's true. So what happens is you have a theory that is totally unprovable. There's no independent way of demonstrating that it exists. It doesn't leave any markers. It is just purely conjecture. It's junk science, in other words. The only kind of significance that, when you have a case where a person dies while being restrained, there are times when that person has a very high body temperature, and they've exhibited all these symptoms of excited delirium, not simple paranoia or minor hallucinations, but we're talking people who are almost catatonically unresponsive, people who might be, there's a training video that Taser has with an example of a person in Florida, I believe, who is sitting there in a stupor, pouring sweat, dripping sweat, and mumbling some nonsense that you can't even really hear. And apparently they say that's an example of excited delirium. That's a person who wouldn't recognize his family members. That's a person who wouldn't recognize that anybody was restraining him. you wouldn't be saying, you speaking English, much less using the words, please don't kill me, in response to the police. And one of the things that we've learned is that Angelo was very fearful of police. And he was also very fearful of dying. And so when the police came, and we do think that there is a mental health component to the case, that he had a mental impairment. That was a consequence, though, of when he was beaten and may have suffered a brain injury. That's not something, but in any event, that's when he started to manifest these episodes. And basically there would be episodes of fearfulness, being scared of being left alone, almost more like a PTSD type thing rather than an excited delirium thing. And so anyway.
Well, and I want to bring this in because, in June, shortly after the defense in the George Floyd case tried to raise the idea of excited delirium, the AMA came out in opposition to the notion of excited delirium as a medical diagnosis and warned against using it. And they said, current evidence does not support excited delirium as an official diagnosis, and the organization opposes its use until a clear set of diagnostic criteria has been established. So they're not completely discounting that this idea, but they're saying it's basically an unproven idea that's been put forth, and they didn't say this, but been put forth by Taser International. It seems pretty clear in the literature.
Look, I can tell you, I had an episode of excited delirium in the courtroom. When the coroner started to claim that this was excited delirium, I suffered excited delirium. Now, can it kill you? No, I mean, come on. Look, if the only people who are dying with these officers literally on top of them, where they're in a prone restraint position that we know is dangerous, that we know can affect your breathing, and we know weight on the back, weight where you compress the rib cage, and we know that can kill you. So why do you have to, when somebody throws up some nonsense that, as the AMA said, there's no linkage, there's no causal connection between excited delirium and death. So, and it's ludicrous.
It seems like a 200-pound police officer with his knee on the guy's neck, holding him in a prone position where, the air passages are going to be obstructed. Seems like a much simpler cause of death than jumping through all these hoops.
You might call that an example of Occam's razor.
Yeah, exactly. So what does your medical examiner say?
Well, what I found interesting, number one, is the county pathologist, or the person, the independent contractor for them, said there were no petechial hemorrhages. Now, that's not true. Our pathologist found significant petechial hemorrhages distributed throughout the eyes. So that raises a lot of suspicions. Secondly, I mean, you could hear him say it. Even when he gave the diagnosis of excited delirium, he gave it with a caution. He basically said, what I'm about to tell you is a bunch of BS. I mean, he said, this is a very controversial diagnosis that really needs a lot further study. And then he said, this is the cause of death. And the reason, and ultimately what happened was they saw that there was modafinil in his blood. So a lot of excited delirium, so-called excited delirium cases, are linked to methamphetamine use. And certainly, people can, I think they call it tweaking or being spun. They can be in a bad state mentally after doing drugs like methamphetamine or other stimulants. That was not a cause of anything. Modafinil didn't do anything to Angelo, certainly not anything more than the cup of coffee that he had drunk. Now, I'm waiting to hear that there's going to be a synergistic effect between coffee and modafinil that put him in a state of excited delirium. And that's never been proven to do that to anybody else. I'll hold my-
So what I was asking though was, what is your medical examiner saying about cause of death?
Oh, asphyxiation. Plainly, straightforward. You know, the other thing, almost all of these excited delirium death cases, the person has an enlarged heart where they want to call it excited delirium. And that can predispose you, because what happens, you know, if you're in, you know, a worse state already because you've taken a bunch of meth and you have an enlarged heart, and then you reduce the oxygen, well, you're probably more likely to have deleterious consequences. But Angelo didn't. His heart was just fine. His health was just fine, you know, until this happened, until these cops killed him.
So why do these forensic pathologists throw this stuff out there?
It is my belief that they work for the county. Some work directly for the county, for the coroners. Some work for a bunch of different counties, but they're working for the government. These, and you know, the police are government actors. And it is a very codependent relationship. You look at, for the same reason that district attorneys almost never prosecute cops. It is a codependent relationship. And so they're used as a form of cover. But then you have some people who are more independent. I know there's a few doctors. I believe Dr. Bennett Amalu, at one point I had a case where he was a retained county pathologist by San Joaquin County, if I recall correctly, where he diagnosed that it was a asphyxiation death case. And I'm not sure if they've used them since then. But I think that you might lose the contract if you do.
So the other interesting aspect of this was that Contra Costa County, like a lot of other counties in Northern California, contracts with California Forensic Medical Group. It turns out, and we actually covered this 10 years ago when it came out, but Forensic Medical Group was nailed in an investigative report by ProPublica, where they had hired this guy, Dr. Gill, and Dr. Gill wasn't properly licensed, and Dr. Gill had basically gone from the East Coast to the West Coast, and every stop he made, he left a trail of wrongful death findings, basically, and he ends up out in California, and they finally caught up to him in Sonoma County, where he made some massive mistakes. And all that happened as the result of this was that Forensic Medical Group severed their ties with Dr. Gill, but Forensic Medical Group kept their contracts with all of these counties. And what we learned, what ProPublica learned from this, is that there wasn't, an effective oversight system over how these people are licensed and whether they're licensed and who these people are. And so it was a big kerfuffle, but it doesn't look like much has changed.
If I recall, I think CFMG, as we call them, they when they terminated Dr. Gill's contract, they didn't say it was performance-based. They just said they didn't have enough bodies that needed to be autopsied anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's the way of the world. You know, people do something wrong and they don't want to admit it. They don't want to acknowledge it, especially when it's coming from the government side. You know, they're the side that has the power, and they believe that they can dictate, they can change the reality of what happened. It's really, frankly, very disturbing. That's why we have body cameras now. That's why Antioch should have had body cameras, because everybody knows that that's been the case. I think I was watching the People versus O.J. Simpson, and they had the deep dive on Mark Furman. And if you recall, he was talking about how basically they could write up the report about how things happened. They could frame the narrative and decide the facts. Well, that was way back in the early 90s. We know it happened long before then, and it's continued since then. It's just another example of the powerful using the power they have to try to alter the reality of what happened.
So I guess, the question I think a lot of people will have is, okay, so the coroner comes up with this finding. What does that mean for your job, representing this family in this wrongful death case?
Well, so the other thing about that is, maybe the coroner thinks that that's helpful to in defending the officers or in defending the police. In my view, it is terrible. I mean, that tells me how bad their case really is. It tells me they really have no defense, because if you're relying on excited delirium in a case where a person has a normal body temperature, and I have the paramedic records, I have the medical records, the seizure medication, all that. The medical finding was that he suffered anoxic encephalopathy, and that's brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen. So, and that's bolstered by the fact that he had seizures while in the hospital that are a consequence of anoxic encephalopathy. So everything lines up with oxygen, the brain being deprived of oxygen. And so if they had a real defense, I would have expected to have heard it. Now we know they have no defense. So that's what I think of it.
I guess I'm troubled on multiple levels in this case, which is one of the reasons I wanted you guys on, because, first of all, this incident happened after George Floyd. And I know, just in my work, we've run into a number of these cases where it's cop putting knee on neck, knee on back, ends up in asphyxiation. So the police are not learning anything from this.
For me, it's hard to generalize over one specific incident to another specific incident. I think it takes time, because you have people who have been officers for years and they have a way of doing things, and they bought in and they've been trained to buy into this excited delirium nonsense. So they believe in their own mind, and this is one reason why it's so harmful that Taser has pushed this, and that police agencies have pushed excited delirium, because it minimizes the importance to their own officers of all the training they received around avoiding asphyxiation during restraint. So it makes them, I hear officers say all the time, well, he was talking, that meant he could breathe. So I had one officer, quick story, I just have to tell this. I said, really? You understand that that in order to respirate, you have to both inhale and exhale, right? And you understand that to vocalize, that only requires exhaling. You cannot talk while you're inhaling. You know that, right? Oh, yes, you can. Really? Try it. So the dude tries. This is in a deposition under oath. And he's like, finally, I can't. Because you can't. And so, it's just nonsense. It's like what you're doing, though, when you're talking and saying, I can't breathe, you're using up your precious reserves of oxygen to try to tell the officer. And then the police don't take it seriously because they buy into all this BS, and it is lethal. It is killing people. So Taser is killing people by pushing excited delirium. Police agencies are killing people by pushing excited delirium. And anyone who is trying to minimize the importance of positional asphyxiation and pushing ideas like, if you can talk, you can breathe, they're killing people too.
Well, and not only that, and you raise a good point on the
To get plugged
mechanics
into the
of
power
that.
source.
But, one of the other interesting things is, just because you have enough oxygen to say a few words doesn't mean you have enough oxygen getting to your brain
Exactly.
to sustain your life. You know, you don't have to be completely cut off from oxygen to die, which seems to be their thinking is, oh, you know, as long as he gets a little bit of air, he'll be okay. But that's not really how it works. And it just, but that gets me to the other point that I saw here in their description. You know, the mother saying, "Hey, is he asleep?" At no point did they seem to be very concerned to make sure that he was okay. And that was kind of, you know, what we saw in the George Floyd case, and what we've seen in a bunch of other cases that I've covered over the years is, you know, whether or not they want to harm these people, they're not making sure they're okay. Like, you know, if you're like checking on them every little bit to make sure they're conscious, they're getting enough air, you know, that's one thing. But if you're holding them down and you're not checking the life signs, then that's a problem.
We have video of the officers walking into the house, and you can see the look on in the body language on Officer Perkinson as he walks into the house. That's not someone that I want responding to my child who needs help. That's not somebody with that look, who's got that look on their face like this is a nuisance to them, that you know they shouldn't be bothered with. That's not someone I want responding to my child who's in need of help at all.
So, I mean, and then the final angle we've kind of covered a lot, which is, you know, the medical diagnosis and whatever's going on with the coroner's office here. So that's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle. You know, as somebody who is in this field, which one of these are you most concerned about at this point?
Well, I don't know that I'm concerned about any of them, except insofar as there's so much BS. You know, it's just layers of BS. In terms of our case, you know, like I said, what I learned is that there is no good defense here. That's what I learned. So I'm not concerned about any of that. You know, what I am concerned about is more so, you know, about the next case, about the next person that, you know, it won't be with Officer Perkinson because he's retired now, but the next officer, the next person that officers from this agency deal with and they restrain. You know, that's who I'm concerned about, because if you don't take this stuff seriously, if you don't consider that your actions in restraining a person could be lethal if you don't do it right, then more people are going to die. Now, you know, years and years ago, before I went to law school, I was a counselor working at a group homes for severely emotionally disturbed youth, and I had to be trained in restraint. And this is after I graduated college, probably 1997, 98, 99. And I had to restrain kids. And sometimes I would hear that, if you can talk, you can breathe, from other counselors. And I was like, that's obviously not true. But there was no training that said it wasn't true. So I know it really it's a difficult thing that needs to be understood and addressed. Even then, it was clear to me, of course, they were kids, that you could certainly hurt somebody badly and possibly kill them if you restrain them the wrong way. And I feel like police don't have that understanding. And I had that understanding, you know, way back then. So, and it's about time.
And I guess one of the other things I'm really concerned about is there doesn't seem to even now be a system of accountability for when things go wrong. Even in a county like Contra Costa, I mean, we'll see what the DA does, but you know, the DA in Contra Costa County is relatively more progressive than in a lot of other counties, and yet you're still seeing these problems happen in Contra Costa County.
I ought to tell you the story off the record after we finish, and I will, if you're interested. But no, I mean, I'm not sure how much influence the DA had over these proceedings. my hope is that the DA would look at it, would say, are you kidding me? Now we need to really open a case. Hearing that excited delirium diagnosis, knowing that he was fully healthy, his heart was, that Angelo's heart was fine. I mean, if you need anything more to really pursue a criminal case against these officers, well, I got it for you, and it'll be released soon enough when we release our own pathologist report.
And then to the family, I mean, what have you guys learned from all of this other than the horrible tragedy, which, you know, is got to be unimaginable?
I can speak on that a little bit. I know that we have been, you know, we've lived in Berkeley for, how old am I? For, I guess, 16 and a half years or something before we got here. And I still live in Berkeley with my dad sometimes. And growing up there, well, for me, growing up there, I was exposed to a lot of advocacy and just encouragement to stand up for what you believe in and really question the systems around us. But having firsthand experience within this, with these lies, with omissions, with sort of smear campaigns, is that what they call it? It's really disappointing to see it front and center, and especially for it to be somebody in your family or even me, even me. At the coroner's inquest, which we had been, you know, mentally preparing for these last 8 months, because like I said, Ben did tell us, or I said this earlier, but Ben and John, they both told us to not get our hopes up and to understand that this is the way that things worked out a lot in the past. That's the way it might work out in this case. But even so, it was really disappointing. It was also really interesting just to see the amount of bias, although the hearing coordinator, I'm sorry, I don't remember who he was or what his official title was, but he spoke about impartiality. Of course, that's in the rules, so you have to read those to the jury and everything, but you could see, you know, he didn't name two key firsthand witnesses, especially the mother of my brother, who was in the room the entire time. And they didn't refer to us by name at all, a single time in the entire 4-hour or so period that they held the inquest. And there were, I could take hours describing all the lies and the omissions and the expressions of biases, and it would overwhelm you. It overwhelms me. But ultimately, it's just very telling. And I'm still really happy that we have a strong set of supporters and community members who are just as motivated as us to make some change so that this stops happening to more people, or at least so that we can keep inching forward to gain some semblance of accountability. Because, you know, there's not even the admission of what actually happened that night. They don't admit to that at all, because that's the usual, right? I mean, we have been very privileged in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is that my mom and I were there. My mom was in the room, and not a lot of family members, not a lot of people generally witness these things firsthand, and it can be really difficult to hear how much people just try to push the falsehoods, is that a word, the lies, but it's also really encouraging to know that we do have the truth on our side. But I know that also you're asking what we learned.
What happened that
But,
night,
yeah,
what I saw and what I, you know, everything that happened that night, I will never forget. That is something that I can't, even if I want to forget about it, I don't think I will. It's here, you know, that I, it's, I
and we
have to
don't
learn how to live with that. every day.
And mom always says that she doesn't think, we don't think that the officers can forget what happened that
I
night
don't
either.
think so. I mean,
It's just a lot easier to fight for your life when you have a life to live, and the
mhm.
person that you've done something to is not alive anymore.
I mean, I'm sure they know what happened that night, you know.
And I'd also like to take this opportunity to briefly just reiterate what Ben has said countless times, and in that the only symptom of excited delirium, if we're speaking about it legitimately, is that he was restrained by officers. That's the only symptom my brother exhibited. So
Yeah, exactly.
Robert, what's your take on all of this?
You know, when you step away just a tiny a bit, I think what's odd is it's so politicized, and that there's a tale of two Americas, and there are the people that are kind of on behalf of the powerful, and they may be the powerful, and they feel powerful in society, and there are the people that aren't and are on the other side and are assumed. You know, the really troubling assumption I get is that so many people will sort of assume that if somebody runs into a difficulty with law enforcement, it is their fault automatically. But the treatment was so different, is what I can say. Just really, so it's really kind of shocking, frankly, as somebody that always sort of expected, you know, rights to be provided to somebody. I know the system has many problems, but it's really, really shocking to be in the middle of what you know is a lie, and just seeing the system actually cover up, and having to, I think I was privileged before because I didn't have to watch it. I knew it would happen, but I didn't have to follow every single painful step. You know, I could sort of check back in and go, oh yeah, that case, of course, it went this way, or they covered it up that way, and sort of read the summary, which is a lot easier. It's a bit more difficult to go through it when you're seeing it step by painful step. Having said all that, you know, we have been, I think, fortunate that it's at a time where there's at least sort of room for change, and we've had a lot of community support, and we've been able to pass or help pass a lot of reforms in Antioch with body cams and non-police mental health response teams, and now the banning of the knee to neck and other positional asphyxia causing restraints that's up for the council meeting tomorrow night. So this have been things that make it, and on the state level with AB 490, banning the positional asphyxia holds throughout California. So we've, I think, are hopefully working towards a world where less, you know, where families don't have to go through the same thing we've had to go through. But it's very strange when you think of yourself as an American and you think you should be under a system that follows the rule of law, and yet what you find is that certain people are above the law. And you know, I thought the whole idea behind the origins was we don't have kings here. Well, we do have kings. We have separate laws for different people, and I don't think that should be the case. So not only are there separate laws, but we have things like the inquest, which was one of the most biased process I have ever seen. When we were going in, they let all the police go in, they closed the doors and left us all out. And they met with the hearing examiner, or whatever it's called, certainly not a judge, I would hope. And this was the most biased process I've ever seen in my life. They said they would ask questions and let the attorneys ask questions. They never did that. They didn't do anything they were supposed to. The guy was basically leading the witness. What would be normally an objection in court with leading the witness, you had a police officer who would forget to say something he had in his list, and he'd be like, oh, you forgot this, you forgot that, you know.
exactly.
So it was the complete opposite of an impartial process. And so why have a hearing if you only get to hear from one side? This is equivalent of, you know, it actually flies in the face of what American jurisprudence is supposed to be about. So,
At
you
the very
know,
least, they're under
David,
oath.
it's very strange to be in the middle of it. Yeah, please.
That's why we'll be in federal court. That's why we are in federal court. It's not a perfect place, but it is far better than the county, and certainly Contra Costa County.
And also, if I can add something to just what my dad had said previously about just us being privileged, we have been privileged, and I said this before as well, we continue to be very privileged in this struggle. We have a lot of support. We're coming out really strong, and we definitely still have our confidence and we have our mental strength to guide us through, because we do have our
know the
have the
truth.
truth. We know the truth.
We know the truth.
And I just also wanted to include that my mom kind of was exploring the fact that her worldview has shifted. So you asked what we were learning about, and my mom has kind of been struggling with sort of the grief of a loss of a worldview, in that, we were privileged enough to believe that if you just comply with law enforcement when you encounter them at any point, and you just be as passive as possible, go with whatever they say, just as my brother used to tell us to do, that you would be safe. That turned out not to be the case here, and we're also learning that some people's worldview is that that isn't the case, so you do have to fight back if you think that you're going to lose your lives. And that is also why some people resist arrest or just any encounters with the police. And so that's just been a tough thing also for my mom that she had talked to me about before, which is just having a new worldview and having to accept this new reality wherein not everything is so black and white, that you can be in such a confusing situation and not make it out of that, even if you do everything right. Yes, and then that's
Well, at least we know, the good. One of the good things that came out of this inquest is now we know their story, and they are under oath.
Mhm.
That's
So they
one
have
of-
to stick with this one.
Yes.
Unlike the previous couple.
Yeah. They had so many stories, but they weren't under oath. They were just, throwing it out there.
We'll see what they stick with. You know,
We will see.
So Ben, any closing thoughts?
sorry. Look, our case is unaffected by this finding. It was anticipated. It has no effect upon our case whatsoever. And, what I do think, like I said, it revealed the true weakness of their case.
All right. I want to thank everyone for coming on. This was a horrible tragedy. It was a horrible tragedy that took the life of a young man who was loved by his family, and it shouldn't have happened. I think that's very clear. It's very avoidable based on the facts that have come out. And then it's compounded by officials using medical terminology that has no medical basis. And the AMA has come out and said as much. This isn't something new. This has been going on for a long time. And I think that makes it even more tragic. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system. Did it automatically this time. Let's see. Oh, there's. Nikki?
Hold on 1 second, please. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Now I can see you.
Oh, good.
How are things going?
I'm sorry?
I said, how are things going?
Things are going well. Things are going well. Life is
Good.
good, all things considered.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I know. How's it going?
Crazy.
That's to be expected in these times. Where's the best place for me to look as far as like
You're
Yes,
looking actually dead on as far as
right
I
now?
can tell. Yeah,
Okay. It's not intuitively where I would look, but it's into the camera.
yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah,
I
we're
have a
just
microphone. Do you want me to, should I lower it or is it good?
if you can lower it, it'd probably be better because right now it's in the screen.
Right. I see that. Let me see. I don't know if the audio is going to be as good if it's lowered. Is it as good?
It sounds fine.
Okay. Okay.
So we're just waiting for Ann.
Okay. And so we're going to talk about I'm assuming just the like the principles behind it or
Yeah, to me, there's kind of the issue that people of color especially are underrepresented on juries, even though they're overrepresented among the accused. What the law would do, how it would help. There's Ann.
right.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. There she is.
Hi, David. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Ann.
How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
We made it.
Can't complain. It's crazy times.
I actually had to kick my electrician out just now. So my electrician came to do some work today, and I was like, I can't do this. Like the garage door is going to go up when you leave. My son can let you out. But then he was like drilling stuff downstairs. I guess it's, I'm redoing my bathroom and it just, so I feel bad, but I thought I can do both. But then when the drilling started, I was thinking, uh-oh, don't want that.
So, Ann, I don't know if you remember me, but I met you in New York like 2.5 years ago at John Jay College.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
What were
my
you guys
God.
doing? My sister went to John Jay. What were you guys doing there?
I was there was I forget what they called it, but they put on this fines and fees reporters I don't remember what it was called even, but basically we had like 2 days of talks and discussions on fines and fees, and then we had to write an article on it. But it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. I do remember you. And I think it was called like Cash Register Justice or something.
There
I'm
you go.
so glad there was like another Californian there. So
Yeah, no, like I've known Maurice Bosley for like ever, and he's like, hey, I don't have enough people, can you come? And I'm like, okay. They're like, we'll fly you out there and put you up in a hotel. I'm like, okay, I can't complain about this, except that it was like 15 degrees and this Californian wasn't dressed properly, but hey.
I'm going to move one thing here because I see something kind of weird here.
I'm
Hold
gonna
on
grab a glass of water just real quickly.
I think
No
I
problem.
can do the same.
Yeah. How have you been? What have you been working on?
Well, we
Okay.
have a Court Watch project, which started out in Yolo County and is now in 6 different counties, including San Francisco. And then we have this weekly podcast that we do, and I ran out of our backlog of material this week, and so I reached out to Danica at the public defender's office and said, hey, give me some ideas. And she's like, hey, have you done anything on this? And I'm like, oh no. And so then Valerie, arranged it all. So it's kind of how this all came about. But it's a great topic. I hadn't even thought of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been fascinating putting this together, working with Nikki and people who are really in it, and no, we're really excited about it, and just have our fingers crossed that this bill is going to make it across the finish line, because it's really important.
All right. Well, let's not waste our good material on
Okay.
on the warm up here. So try to go about half an hour, maybe slightly more, and we'll go from there. So unless you guys have any questions, we can get started. It's been recording, but don't worry, we'll cut off all this. You guys ready?
Yep.
I'm ready.
Good.
And sorry, can you tell me how to pronounce your last name again?
Yes. So stool drayer, think stool that you sit on, and drayer rhymes with chair.
Okay. Stool drayer.
Yep.
Got it. All right. Perfect. All right. Here we go. We're going to start in 3, 2, 1. So today on Everyday Injustice, we will be talking about a juror pilot initiative that would increase pay for jurors in an effort to improve the diversity of the jury pool, which is a huge problem that I've noted in my now 15 years of covering the courts. And with us today, we have Deputy Public Defender Nikki Solis. She is the chair of the Racial Justice Committee at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. And we have Ann Stuhldreher, who is the director of the Financial Justice Project in the Office of the Treasurer for the City and County of San Francisco. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for
Thanks
having
for
me.
having us.
So I think, this is one of the more under-recognized problems that we have in the criminal legal system, because basically you have a large pool, unfortunately, of people of color who end up accused in the criminal legal system, but they end up being tried by a jury that really doesn't look like their peers, because most of the people available for jury duty are either well off or they're retired. And so you end up with these kind of older retired white folk on juries. Not that there's anything wrong with them per se, but if you don't have balance, then there's a problem. So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about what AB 1452 would do.
Well, if I may, AB 1452 is a law to allow the city and county of San Francisco to do the pilot project. So under the Code of Civil Procedure, Section 215, jurors are to get paid $15 a day. And I don't think that amount has changed in well over a decade, if not two. I think the last perhaps time that that statute was even amended was back in 2004. So we're at $15 a day at 34 cents a mile. So what we have been doing for at least the past year is researching and figuring out how we can compensate jurors who cannot serve due to financial hardship. And AB 1452, introduced by Assemblyman Phil Ting, helps us to not contradict the current California law. So obviously we can't pass any kind of policy or any kind of legislation in San Francisco that's contrary to state law. So this is the bill that's going to even allow us to start the pilot project program with the help of Assemblyman Ting and Senator Scott Wiener. And of course, we have the treasurer, city treasurer, Mr. Cisneros, and PD Raju, and Chesa Budin, the district attorney, on board. And we've been all working collaboratively and wonderfully together to try to make this happen, because what we want is justice for San Franciscans. We don't want a certain outcome. That's why we have so many stakeholders at the table and in agreement, because it's about participation. It's about allowing people to participate in the process and having them be a part of, our society in a way of, in the way of civic duties. And it's something that is very, very important in all communities. So that's where we are.
And maybe you can talk about how this came about.
Yeah, sure. I remember when the public defender came over to our office to talk to Treasurer Cisneros and I about this, and what he and others in the public defender's office were seeing. I think I and a lot of folks had never thought about it. Like, you get your jury summons in the mail. Sometimes you're less than excited, when you see that. But it really is, the right to a jury of your peers is at the core of our justice system. And it's the only right that occurs in both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But in terms of what we're seeing, and you've both spoken to this, is juries that are wealthier, that are whiter, and that really don't reflect, the diverse communities of our cities. And so we just want to make sure that everybody has, as fair a shot as possible at, this, which is really probably one of our highest kind of calls to civic duty. So it was interesting, after speaking to the public defender's office, we, do all of our work in collaboration. And it was, this was a problem that, the DA's office was seeing, the Bar Association, everyone was agreeing, like, gosh, really, $15 a day. Like, for a lot of us, our employers compensate us for jury service. But for so many people, if you're self-employed, if you work in the gig economy, if you work at a small business, if you happen to be unemployed, like it, people, we need to up the compensation level so we have a more economically diverse jury, and hopefully a more racially diverse jury. Again, just to make sure that the juries really, reflect San Francisco, and we think that's really important to administer justice in our city.
And Nikki, as a public defender, can you speak to how important that jury composition actually is?
It's extremely important, both on, a legal and a moral level. In Taylor versus Louisiana, which is 419 U.S. 522, that's my cite as a lawyer. I like to give citations. That case, in an 8-1 Supreme Court decision back in 1975, said that basically we are entitled to a jury of our peers that makes a cross-section of the community. And I've had cases where I've had an African-American client and 0 African-American jurors sworn to serve. We have jurors who come in, some are folks of color, and some have financial hardships. And we don't even get to talk to them. They just get dismissed because of their hardship. And so that is the unfortunate part of what we're seeing, and we're trying to rectify it to the extent that we can. And it's very narrow. It's just for the folks who are unable to serve due to a financial hardship. And so, that's where we are. We all have a right to a jury trial, and we all have a right to a jury of our peers, and that's what we want to see. I had a client in a very serious case. He was living in Chinatown in a very small studio apartment, an immigrant, with his mom, with his dad, with two other siblings in a one-room studio. And, we didn't get anyone who remotely had his experience and his family's experience. We didn't have anyone serving from that area of the city, Chinatown. We didn't have someone that looked like him, and that to me is what is important here. And sometimes it's random who comes in, but we want to make sure that when people are called to serve, they're not unable to based on money.
So how would this work? I mean, if you were a juror under this new system, and you said it's only people that have economic hardship. So how would that be determined, and when would that be determined?
Well, I can tell you that I don't know that answer, because that is a question to be answered when we get to that point. I can tell you what we're doing now. What we're doing now is when someone has a financial hardship, the judge reviews it and determines, well, this is too hard on your family. You're the only person who's providing, and you have your own business, or you're in the gig economy, and you're not getting paid by an employer. So you're gone. So that we never even cross the threshold of who you are, whether or not you're able to serve. But as far as procedurally what's going to happen, I think that is for a later day. But what we envision is that all who are unable to serve due to financial hardship would be offered the option to stay and get $100 per day in order to serve.
Yeah, Nikki is exactly right. So I think that, we're seeking kind of state authorization to conduct this pilot. And then, we're going to be working collaboratively with the court to develop eligibility guidelines. The resources, I think, will be targeted to individuals with low incomes. So, say who are below, some certain amount, of area median income, and also, where their employer does not compensate, or their employer doesn't compensate for the length of the jury trial, or they're self-employed, or they're unemployed. So, when if this bill is passed, we'll be able to start this up in January. And, when people get their jury summons in the mail, they're going to learn about this program. Like, hey, if you are worried about if there are financial barriers for you to serving, that we have this this offer, that for folks with low incomes and where their employer doesn't already or cover their time on a jury, that we can offer this $100 a day. And we really want to see what happens with this. Do we have juries that are more economically diverse, that are more racially diverse, along the lines of what our public defender's office, our DAs, our bar association, what everyone would really like to see.
So has anywhere else in the country done something like this?
If they have, I would have to admit that I'm a terrible researcher then, because I have searched high and low, and there had been some talk of it having been done or researched in Louisiana, particularly in New Orleans. There was talk of it being done in Texas, Austin. And I have to say, I think I did my due diligence and I scoured the country, and this is it. This is San Francisco, California, and we are always innovative, and we always try things and show the rest of the state, rest of the country, rest of the world what we're capable of. So as far as I know, this is the first time that we're really getting this far.
And what has the conversation been like as this idea has been floating around and circulating?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for those of us who are less involved in courtrooms kind of day to day, like Nikki, folks in the DA's office, the courts, it was, to be candid, like I hadn't really thought about this barrier. But it's, there's been a remarkable consensus as we've been talking to, folks, in San Francisco, in the mayor's office, folks throughout City Hall, and also in the community. Nikki and I took part in a meeting with a lot of different community groups, criminal justice reform groups, and it was, I think people were very supportive. It was a great meeting. It was also, just to be totally honest, it made me realize, just how much work we have to do. There are so many barriers, to our justice system, to access to justice. So many people who believe that, the system does not work for them. I think this is an important program, and it's an important start, but, we just, we have a lot of work to do kind of in this space overall.
So I did some math. And the basic math is $100 a day is kind of the equivalent of just under 7 hours of work at $15 an hour. So obviously it's not a tremendous amount of money, especially if you're living in San Francisco. But it's definitely a lot more than $15 a day. Which is the current rate. But how did you guys arrive at that, or is it just because it was a nice round number?
Well, I think your math is very interesting, because that's what we're looking at. Jury service is about 7 hours a day, right? They usually come in at 9. Court usually adjourns by 4:30. We have some breaks, we have lunch. So we sort of looked at what a fair, not necessarily a livable wage in San Francisco, but a fair hourly wage would be. And we didn't want it to necessarily, and we've talked about this, it might change, who knows? But we didn't want it to be something that was hourly. We wanted it something to be very, very basic, and that there was really no incentive to stay longer or leave earlier. So it seems like it was like a fair amount to get to based on your approximate hourly service. Yeah, and what is fair in our city.
And any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, no, just what Nikki said. I think we wanted it to be simple for people to understand. We wanted it to pencil out to, approximately what our minimum wage is in the city. We wish it could be more, but we are piloting this with philanthropic dollars, which are limited, so we can really test this out and learn. I will say that in our research leading up to this, like we did speak with many jurors who had requested a financial hardship. And again, it was interesting. A lot of folks who work in the gig economy as drivers or delivery people or what have you. And, they all said they had not served because they, if they don't work, they don't get paid. And, we were asking, like, would this be enough? Like, would this, make a difference for you to serve? And, people said, absolutely. It's interesting, like San Francisco, there is like a tremendous amount of wealth in our city right now. But we're a city of 900,000 folks, about 250,000 or, I think unfortunately even more than that right now, have incomes that are low enough to be receiving Medi-Cal, CalFresh, which are food stamps, et cetera. We have a lot of folks in our city who are really struggling to get by, and being paid a minimum wage, for a day's work. In our research, did seem to make a difference for folks. I think we all wish that it can be more, but I think it's what we can do right now to test this out.
And I do think, there's a point that we haven't raised here with respect to, some of these trials, 2-3 day trial. Okay. You think, oh, I can kind of bite the bullet maybe for a few days, but some of these trials are long trials. I mean, you can get hit in a 6-month trial, and what are you going to do, to make ends meet? I mean, that's a big hit for a lot of people.
It is, and I've had trials that lasted months, and it really knocks out of the box a lot of people who are from lower income communities, and that's simply not, it's not fair, and it's not right. I think that even doing the pilot program and talking to the folks in the community-based organizations, the victims' rights advocate organizations, they express so much support and enthusiasm. We know it's not a panacea for making jurors diverse, but we know that it will address the issue of folks being unable to serve due to what's in their wallet, and that should determine who gets to participate in our criminal legal system.
One thing that might surprise you, or maybe it won't, but is that for many years I have tried to get data on what jury composition looks like. And it turns out nobody tracks these numbers, not at the courthouse, not in any of the counties that I've tried to do. So we don't actually know what these juries look like, other than what we see with our own eyes anecdotally.
That's true. And we wish we were in a post-racial society, but we know we're not. Like, things occur, and people have different perspectives, and people have different experiences, and all those experiences and all those perspectives mean something. And it means a lot when you're sitting next to a client and they see somebody that, looks like them sitting there judging the facts. You will have people who have more trust in the system and more faith in the system. And by putting this out there, you're going to generate an interest in civic participation. And, that's a good thing. It's a great thing. And so, it's definitely, we're definitely, I think, on the precipice of something that is really great, that's dynamic, that's good. And the interesting thing is that everyone on all sides seem to agree that it's a fair thing to do. And it addresses at least in part, a problem that we have in jury selection. We might not know the actual numbers. You might not be able to collect the data. But as a trial attorney, I've done over 50 jury trials. I will tell you that we do not have diverse juries in San Francisco as far as racial makeup. And there might be a lot of reasons for that. But we definitely want to take out that element of financial hardship out of that equation. And this is just a really direct and simple way to do it. And so, yeah, you won't probably find a data, but if you talk to defense attorneys, you'd be hard pressed to get 3 people in the entire pool who are, for instance, African American. And so, you know, it's definitely you are. I've been in trials actually where a person, and sometimes it's not, it's someone of a wholly different race, and they stand up and they say, how could this man get a fair trial? Look at this jury room. Where are his peers? I've had that happen to me at least on 3 occasions in trial. And people start clapping. People start saying, yes, I was thinking that. So we know there's an issue, and it's an easy one to resolve when it comes to this, you know, this narrow segment of that issue.
And the scary thing is, having been in jury trials in San Francisco and other counties, it's a lot better in San Francisco than a lot of other counties in terms of racial makeup, believe it or not. I've seen much worse. Do we have a sense for how many people we're talking about with respect to needing this sort of benefit in order to be able to sit on a jury, like in a year or so?
In a year? Well, I mean, if you go panel by panel, I would say that now probably you get more hardship requests based on what we're in right now with this pandemic. But even when I was, you know, doing trials and picking juries, I would say that a good chunk, probably about 15 to 20% of folks had financial hardship. Now, people have language hardships and all that. But when we're talking about financial hardship, there's a significant amount, because a lot of people are struggling in our city right now and have been for years. So I was the type of lawyer, when I pick juries, I would insist on going up into the jury room with my client. And sometimes the judge allowed the client to go, sometimes not. And we can talk about that aspect of the law some other time. But I've sat in the jury room, where the assembly room, where they show you the video and everything, as a lawyer, with my briefcase, with my notes. And I watched who got dismissed for financial hardship, who were given financial hardship. And so as I watched, I saw there was a problem as far as letting these folks go out the door simply because of monetary limitations. And so I saw it firsthand. I can tell you that there is an issue there, and it's not necessarily based on what you look like. It's, you know, there are people who are struggling in the city, and they should be allowed to participate in the criminal legal system just like anyone else.
And is there anyone that's opposed to this proposal, or is this just a matter of trying to figure out how to make the budget work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, no one, we haven't faced any significant opposition yet, kind of on this bill. I think everyone agrees that this is a problem. It's just a question of really how do we best address it. And just to kind of echo what Nikki just said, there was a survey done by, I think it was the Association of the Courts, that found that about 35% of jurors that were I forget, it was 35% of people said that jury service, was a financial hardship. And in San Francisco, there are a few thousand people each year who claim a financial hardship. And just what Nikki was just describing, like, how can we administer justice when it's like, the bigger your wallet or the better resource your employer makes it more likely that you're going to sit in judgment of people in our city. Like, that is just, blatantly wrong. So, this is a really important and meaningful, I think, first step in a lot of work that we have to do, to make sure our justice system serves everyone fairly.
And then finally, what does the prognosis look like? I mean, is this bill likely to get passed this term?
Yeah, we've got our fingers crossed. Yeah, we're hopeful. There's a few weeks left in the session, and it's got to move through a few committees and get to the governor's desk. But so far so good. It's had a lot of support, and it's been interesting. As word of the bill has spread, it's surfaced lots of folks who are like, yes, this is a really important fix that we need, not just in San Francisco, but in California as well.
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of in your boat, that I knew there was a problem with the jury pool. In fact, I had actually tried in several counties, as I mentioned, to get data on what that looked like, and was unable to do, which always makes me suspicious as to what the data actually looks like, right? Because if it looked good, they seem to find a way to get it to you. It's when it doesn't look good that they go, oh, we don't have that. We don't keep track of that. It's like, how could you not keep track of what the jury composition looks like? I digress. But I hadn't thought of, the jury pay issue as being a huge factor. But, this discussion has definitely pushed me over clearly to see the problem and see this as a clear solution. So as we wrap up, maybe quick closing thoughts by both of you.
Well, I just want to say, like, many years ago, Mano Raju, before he became public defender, he was in management, and he had been having this torch for this thing, and I'm glad that he saw it through, and that others agreed that it's something that should be done. I do want to say that if you're listening to this podcast and you ask yourself, what can I do? Why didn't they tell me what I can do? Hey, call your legislators, call your assemblymen, call your assemblywomen, call your senators, and ask them to support this bill. Just one phone call would probably make a difference. So just pick up the phone and call, your local representative and say that you're in support of this, because it's a project that will inform the rest of the state. We have great jurors in San Francisco, but it's always good to have more civic participation. It's always good to have more people engaged in the process. And that's all we want. We want more people engaged in the process, not necessarily for a particular outcome, but just so that everybody gets to serve and everybody gets to be a part of our system, and everybody gets to engage in the community and in the civic duty process. And it's a beautiful thing the more that we have folks engage. And just having the project and doing the advertisement, I'm excited about it, because I feel like people are going to say, what, this is something that sounds really good. I'm interested. Because believe it or not, folks don't even know how they can serve on juries. They've never been called to service. So this is something that is going to do more than just that one thing. It's going to actually build interest in what we're doing in our courts. And who would be against that? I think that it's good for our communities.
Ann?
Yeah, exactly what Nikki said. If you do make that call to your representative, the bill number is AB 14 Assembly Bill 1452. It is authored by our local representative, Phil Ting. Yeah, we're really excited about it. And, just as we've kept saying throughout this, the size of your wallet shouldn't determine if you who should be able to serve and not on a jury. So yeah, we're looking forward to hopefully getting this bill over the finish line and being able to hopefully try this out in San Francisco.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming on. That's Nikki Solis from the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, and Ann Stuhldreher, who is the director of the Financial Justice Project for the City and County of San Francisco. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm David Greenwald, your host. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system. All right,
Thanks,
that's a
David.
wrap.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
All
You
right,
too.
thanks,
Bye.
David. Bye, Nikki.
Bye. Bye, Ann. Thank you.
Thanks.